Kevin Haig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the past 5 years, I have stood often in this House to speak about the tragedy of Pike River and the reasons for it. And I have laid the blame fair and square on the era of deregulation from the 1990s, the withdrawal of the state from ensuring worker health and safety, the dismantling of the underground coal mining regulations, and the abolition of the check inspectors. Mr. Speaker, and the Green Party has worked tirelessly to expose this systemic failure, the reasons for it, and we have worked to find solutions, and we take some significant credit for the High Hazards Unit, for the Royal Commission of Inquiry, for the Independent Task Force, for the re-regulation of underground coal mining and the return of check inspectors. Mr. Speaker, it is scandalous that it took all this time and the deaths of 29 men in that mine for these changes to occur. And all of the governments since the 1990s, I'm sure, now must feel some sense of discomfort, even shame that it has taken that long. Mr. Speaker, none of those changes would have come naturally to this government. It's against their political nature. They have only made those changes, Mr. Speaker, because they judged that it was politically not viable not to do so. But, Mr. Speaker, the years have passed, and now we find the bill that's intended to overhaul the health and safety legislation that underpins all of those things comes back to the House for its final reading in diluted form. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether that dilution has occurred because the National Party's donors and sponsors objected to the bill in its original form. And I don't know whether the reason was instead that there was a resurgence of the neoliberal members of the National Party caucus. But what I do know, sir, is that the issue that we should be focused on in this House is not the worm farming and the mini golf, the farcical situation created by the National Party trying to carve out an exemption for its mates. Instead, Mr. Speaker, what we should be focused on is the fact that the bill that is being passed today in this third reading...
I am going to interrupt the member. It's a long-standing series of Speaker's rulings which have indicated that members cannot allege that bills have been changed to please parties' donors. The member has done that, and I ask him to withdraw that comment.
I withdraw it, Mr. Speaker.
Kevin Haig.
What I am saying to the House today is that the issue that we should be focused on as a House is the fact that the bill that will be passed today does not honour the right of all workers to a safe workplace. That is the issue that we should be focused on. And Mr. Speaker, my colleague Denise Roche has already mentioned that small workplaces in some situations are more risky than large ones. Members of this House will know that in smaller workplaces, the relationships, personal relationships between bosses and workers often create a situation where it is not viable for workers to raise their concerns. In those small workplaces, the principle that the government members have spoken about today and throughout this debate of worker engagement and participation is meaningless if their right to representation on health and safety is not honoured, as it is not in this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2011, I listed in this House members of the government who had been members of the House back in the 1990s when the changes to health and safety legislation that I've described were passed. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the government members in 2011 did not appreciate me doing that. Members of the government benches in the 1990s spoke about balance, as indeed government members in this debate today and throughout have been saying, a balance between the rights of employers and the rights of workers. Mr. Speaker, West Coast Regional Councillor Peter Ewan has written a book about Pike River, which he subtitles Death by Parliament. And I have a sick feeling, Mr. Speaker, that sometime in the future, an opposition member will be standing where I am today, reading out the names from the government benches who are passing this legislation today. Thank you.